of women to health. That's not what this hearing is about. I've had the implication that this hearing is about the fact that government is more compassionate than the church, that they care more about people than the church does, and that there are obvious needs here, and the church is so out of step with culture that they don't know the issues of medication, and so the government's more compassionate. I've even heard that this is about whether you'll be jailed or not. It's an interesting comment to realize that there's a fine coming down on your organization of multi-millions of dollars if you don't behave according to the administration's wishes. Now, that creates an interesting conversation we might be able to have at another moment, in that all of you represent nonprofit institutions. Is that correct? Yeah. Do you pay federal taxes? No. None of you are from institutions because you're a nonprofit institution. Do you realize the administration has said publicly numerous times that the penalties involved in the President's health care plan are not penalties, they're fines. I'm sorry, they're not fines, they're taxes. Well, if that's so, my recommendation to you, of course I'm not an attorney, if these penalties are to be considered taxes, not penalties, and you're a nonprofit organization that pays no taxes, perhaps these things do not apply to you then, because you pay no tax. Now, if they want to argue in front of the Supreme Court that these are penalties, not taxes, which apparently they're set up in March to argue that they are taxes, and that they have the power to tax, then it will be interesting to see how the administration splits that hair as well. I've heard today that this is an attack on the administration about religious liberties. Well, I don't agree, though there are areas that we could discuss about Hosanna Tabor and the administration fighting all the way to the Supreme Court to try to be involved in the hiring of ministers, which the Supreme Court in a rare 9-0 disputed the administration and said ministers have the ability to be able to hire, or churches have the ability to be able to hire ministers as they choose. We could discuss how the Army is choosing to try to go in and edit the sermons of their chaplains. But today, this hearing is about, can this administration or any administration say, I know your doctrine, but I have a different doctrine, and you will change your doctrine to my doctrine, or I will fine you. That's what today is about. Can any administration step into a church and to say, I disagree with your doctrine, you will change it to mine? Now, I have a historical question for that, and Dr. Mitchell, I'm going to pick on you because I'm a Southwestern grad as well. In 1800, this was referenced earlier, Thomas Jefferson wrote an interesting letter to Danbury Baptists, actually, and made a reference that has been used over and over again about the wall of separation between church and state. He was assuring Danbury Baptists that the state would not go after the church and its doctrines and its teachings. Am I correct or incorrect on that?
Yes, you are.
Would you like to allude to any of that at all about that particular letter that's been referenced a lot?
Well, the intent was to protect the church from the state.
From the state, not protecting the state from the church.
That's right.
So, the other Dr. Mitchell, you want to comment on that as well?
I would, and I should disclose that I'm also a Southwestern Seminary alumnus.
Well, we're loaded here. This may be the first time in congressional history 3 Southwestern grads are in the same room. So.
In our offices at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, there is a portrait that hangs above the fireplace of John Leland, who was the Baptist minister who had entree to that discussion with the Danbury Baptists and our early founders. Religious liberty is a Baptist principle through and through, and I'm happy to say we have had historically a contribution to make in that area.
Was that doctrine intended again, or was that letter intended to say to the folks of the Danbury Baptist Association, we will make sure as a federal government we're not intruding on your religious rights?
Yes, sir.
That's absolutely right.
Any other comments on that before I yield back my time? With that, thank you, gentlemen, very much for being here. I'm honored to be able to have your time here and to be able to be here to express this on this key issue. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. We now go to the gentleman from Arizona, Dr. Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I've always been one of personal accountability and personal responsibility. So when you go trampling on the Constitution, you get the full regards of the Constitution. I am tired of politicians and constitutional attorneys picking and choosing the language of which they want to disdain for the Constitution to show that it upholds. We've referenced the letter from the Dansbury Baptists, and I think it is appropriately that we go through the full context so that it's full part of the record. And so I'd like to recite it. This is from the letter of Jefferson to the Dansbury Baptists on the 1st of January, 1802, and he says, "Gentlemen, the affectionate sentiments of esteem and approbation which you are so good as to express towards me on behalf of the Dansbury Baptist Association give me the highest satisfaction. My duties dictate a faithful and zealous pursuit of the interests of my constituents, and in proportion as they are persuaded of my fidelity to those duties, the discharge of them becomes more and more pleasing. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to no other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state, adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience. I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. I reciprocate your kind prayers for the protection and blessings of the common Father and Creator of man, and tender you for yourselves and your religious association assurances of my high respect and esteem. Thomas Jefferson, January 1st, 1802. With all due respect, when the President asks for a problem, he's just like any of us. He is a man. He is right and he is wrong. He has stepped into this. He has made it a problem. And who better than another president, Thomas Jefferson, to set the record straight? We need to start looking at the full context, not picking and choosing the simple words that we want to utilize to support ourselves. We need to get back to the doctrine and understand the full discourse of how we look at the separation of the First Amendment and religious freedom. And I'm tired of people picking and choosing, because when we look back at history, the constitutional scholars who say that they represent it do more damages than they do support. And with that, I'd like to yield my good friend from South Carolina, Mr. Milk Mulvaney.
I thank my colleague, and very briefly, I want to try and expand this conversation a little bit. We've heard a lot of discussion today about Catholic hospitals or Jewish charities, but it strikes me that we should extend the conversation into the private sector as well. And I would suggest to you, and I ask Reverend Harrison, for example, if I'm a devout Lutheran businessman and I have 75 people working for me, am I not as aggrieved as the church is if I am forced to offer these particular services to my employees?
I think, in fact, you are, as a matter of fact. In fact, and even as you said that, I can think of a wonderful family that has treated its employees like gold for its entire existence. Employees love to work at this large organization that I'm thinking of, and yet these are very devout people who absolutely loathe acting against their consciences. Let me, at the risk of taking some of your time, Mr. Congressman, I really loathe the partisan nature of this discussion. 98% of what I do, what the Missouri Synod does, is completely bipartisan. We represent a large church body. The constituents are in some way evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. We do not operate in a partisan way. I also stand at an altar regularly to administer the sacrament, and in the prayers of the church, I pray personally for the President, his well-being, and the well-being of our nation. I personally get on my knees every single morning in my office, and I pray for the President of this country and this government. Luther bids us in the Small Catechism, defend, speak well of him, and put the best construction on everything. I know this is a different game here. This is hardcore politics. I'm here for one reason. I'm here because there is a narrow but very significant provision in the HHS provisions that is I believe, very dangerous to religious people with our kind of convictions. And I believe it's also dangerous to any religious people who have unique convictions. So that's why I'm here.
Reverend, ordinarily we are very protective of our time here. I thank my colleague for yielding it to me, and I can assure you that I've never been more pleased to yield it to someone else. So thank you, sir, for your comments. With that, I yield back.
My apologies.
We now go to what I believe will be the last of the members of the committee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Walsh, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for enduring this last couple of hours. My friend from Virginia said this hearing is a sham, and he and I may agree on that, because for the life of me, I don't know why you all had to be called up here in front of us. Our founders placed you and your concerns on this issue above, on a higher standing than we all are. So there's a big part of me that wants to apologize to each and every one of you for having to be here. This is not about women. This is not about contraceptives. We know, you've said it, we've said it up here. This is about religious freedom. This is about religious liberties. We could be talking about anyone, a Republican or Democrat who doesn't want to serve in a war because of their religious preferences. We could be talking about a Muslim hospital that doesn't want to serve a particular food in their hospital cafeteria because of their deep-seated religious beliefs. So let's put that aside. Thomas Jefferson was referenced. We all famously know that Thomas Jefferson requested 3 things on his tombstone: the father of the University of Virginia, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and the author of Virginia's bill of establishing religious freedoms. And in that bill he said, to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical. John Garvey, who's the president of the Catholic University of America, who I believe will speak in the next panel, put it perfectly. He said, consider these 2 health policies. Consider these 2 insurance policies. Policy A, an employer is required to provide its employees health insurance that covers birth control. Policy B, an employer is required to provide its employees health insurance. The health insurance company is required to cover birth control. As he says, and it almost made me laugh, I can see where someone could disagree with both of those policies or agree with both of those policies. But for the life of me, I don't understand what the difference is between those 2 policies. And I don't know how you can agree with one and disagree with another. I have a father in St. Mary's Catholic Church back in Woodstock, Illinois, who told me last week that after the president's attempt at a compromise, he's even more disappointed. As he said, it looks like an accounting gimmick. First, it was an insult to our liberty. Now it's an insult to our intellect as well. Did any of you, maybe I missed this earlier on our panel, support Obamacare in its beginning?